this episode, we're going to focus on what happens after you run a benchmark and end up with a list of findings that looks serious but doesn't yet make anyone safer. That moment is common in cloud security. A tool produces dozens or hundreds of results, and the team either panics, ignores it, or fixes a few obvious items and then moves on. The hard part is not collecting findings, but turning them into changes that measurably reduce risk without breaking the environment or creating new problems. For beginners, it helps to see remediation as a disciplined process rather than a heroic burst of work. A good fix addresses the real exposure behind a finding, fits how the organization operates, and can be proven to stay in place over time. The goal here is to learn how to translate benchmark language into practical actions, how to prioritize effectively, and how to avoid the trap of superficial fixes that look good on paper but leave the underlying risk untouched. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A benchmark finding is usually written like a statement about configuration, such as a setting is disabled, a permission is too broad, or a control is missing. The first step toward a real fix is understanding the security intent behind the check, because the intent is what determines whether the proposed remediation actually reduces risk. For example, if a benchmark flags that logging is not configured as expected, the intent might be to ensure accountability and incident investigation capability, not simply to flip a toggle. If you only change one setting without ensuring logs are captured, retained, and accessible to the right people, you may pass the check but still be unable to investigate an incident. Benchmarks are valuable because they point to common weaknesses, but they do not automatically explain the organization's context, data sensitivity, or operational needs. Translating the intent means asking what threat this check is trying to reduce and what would happen if the weakness were exploited. Once you can answer that, you can design a fix that targets the actual risk. The next step is scoping the finding, because a benchmark result is often a symptom that can appear across many resources. You might have a single policy that is wrong in one place or a repeated pattern of misconfiguration across dozens of storage locations, networks, or identities. A concrete fix should aim at the source of the pattern, not only at individual instances, because patching symptoms one by one often fails over time. For example, if many resources are created without encryption, the fix might not be to manually adjust each resource, but to change the default behavior so new resources are created safely. Even without describing specific platform features, you can understand the principle. Address the factory settings and workflows that produce insecure configurations. Scoping also includes identifying what is in scope for remediation now versus what needs planning, because some fixes are simple and some require coordination across teams. Without scope, remediation becomes chaotic and hard to validate. Prioritization is where many teams stumble, because benchmarks can produce a long list that feels equally urgent. Risk-based prioritization means you consider impact and likelihood, not just the number of failed checks. A high-impact issue might involve public exposure, broad privileges, weak identity controls, or missing logs for administrative actions, because those can lead to rapid compromise or prevent detection. Likelihood often depends on exposure and attacker opportunity, such as internet-facing services, widely accessible credentials, or known patterns of misconfiguration that attackers frequently target. Compliance considerations can also affect priority because some findings map directly to strict obligations, but even then, the best approach is to connect compliance to risk rather than treating it as separate. A concrete fix plan usually starts with a small set of high-risk items that can be addressed quickly and safely, then moves to structural improvements that reduce repeated failures. The exam often expects you to choose remediation actions that reduce the most risk first, rather than trying to fix everything in benchmark order. To make a fix concrete, you need a clear remediation statement that describes the change in plain language, tied to the affected resources and the desired outcome. A weak statement sounds like enable security or tighten permissions, because it is too vague to implement or verify. A strong statement names the specific behavior you want, such as restricting access to only required identities, ensuring logs are captured for a defined set of actions, or preventing public access unless there is an approved exception. It also identifies ownership, because in cloud environments, different teams often own identity, networking, data, and applications. If nobody owns the fix, it will not happen or it will be done inconsistently. A good remediation statement also includes success criteria, meaning you can describe what evidence will show that the fix worked. Evidence might include the benchmark check passing, but it should also include proof that the underlying control objective is met. One of the biggest reasons benchmark fixes fail to reduce risk is that teams focus on passing checks instead of addressing attack paths. Attack paths are the routes an attacker might use to move from an initial foothold to sensitive assets or administrative control. A benchmark might flag a broad permission, but the risk depends on whether that permission is reachable by likely attackers and whether it connects to sensitive resources. This is why it helps to think in terms of who can exploit the issue and what they could gain. If a misconfiguration is reachable only by a tightly controlled admin group, it may be lower priority than a misconfiguration reachable by many identities or public access. If a finding affects a service that contains sensitive data, it matters more than the same finding on a test service with no real data. Concrete fixes aim to break the most dangerous paths first, such as removing public exposure, limiting privilege escalation opportunities, and protecting data access boundaries. This mindset produces remediation that actually changes the attacker's options. Change safety is another essential part of remediation, because a fix that breaks production can create pressure to roll back security controls. Beginners sometimes assume security changes are always safe because they are good, but cloud environments are interconnected and fragile in surprising ways. Tightening access can disrupt legitimate workflows, enabling logging can affect storage and cost, and changing network rules can block required communication. A concrete remediation plan includes a way to introduce change carefully, such as testing in a lower-risk environment, rolling out gradually, or validating dependencies before enforcing strict settings. Even in a beginner-focused explanation, you can understand the concept of blast radius. If a change fails, how much does it affect, and how quickly can you recover? When teams plan for safe change, they are more likely to keep the improvement rather than disabling it under pressure. In exam scenarios, the best answers usually balance security improvement with operational resilience. Another common trap is fixing one resource while leaving the underlying process unchanged, which guarantees the finding will return. This is where preventive controls matter, because they stop insecure configurations from being created in the first place. Preventive thinking might include enforcing secure defaults, requiring approvals for risky settings, or limiting who can create certain types of resources. It can also include standard templates and baselines so new systems start in a secure state rather than relying on later cleanup. When you convert benchmark findings into preventive improvements, you reduce future work and reduce the chance that a quiet drift reintroduces risk. Benchmarks are especially useful here because they reveal recurring weaknesses, and recurring weaknesses are usually process problems, not one-time mistakes. The most valuable remediation is often the one that removes an entire category of failure, rather than fixing a single instance. Validation is the step that separates real fixes from feel-good activity, because without validation you do not know whether the risk changed. Validation should include rerunning the benchmark or equivalent checks, but it should also include confirming the intended security outcome. For example, if you changed access rules, validation might include confirming that unauthorized identities can no longer reach the resource, while authorized workflows still function. If you enabled logging, validation might include confirming that relevant events are actually recorded, retained, and searchable for the required time. Validation also needs to be recorded as evidence, because audits and security governance rely on proof, not memory. Beginners often stop after making a change, but mature remediation ends with a clear before and after story, supported by evidence. That story is what proves the fix reduces risk and helps prevent debates later about whether the work was worthwhile. Documentation and exception handling matter because not every benchmark recommendation will fit every environment perfectly. Sometimes the benchmark assumes a default architecture that your organization does not use, or it flags a configuration that is necessary for a legitimate business purpose. The difference between an acceptable exception and a dangerous gap is whether the exception is intentional, reviewed, and protected by compensating controls. A concrete fix plan includes a way to handle exceptions without silently ignoring them. That might mean documenting why an exception exists, limiting its scope, and adding extra monitoring or approvals around it. This approach reduces risk even when you cannot fully align with the benchmark, and it also supports compliance needs because it shows governance and decision-making. On the exam, answers that include controlled exceptions and compensating controls often score better than answers that treat benchmarks as absolute rules or that ignore them entirely. Over time, the best remediation programs build feedback loops so that benchmark findings become inputs to continuous improvement rather than occasional cleanup. That means tracking recurring failures, identifying which teams or processes produce them, and adjusting training, templates, or governance to prevent them. It also means measuring outcomes in a way that makes progress visible, such as fewer high-risk findings over time, faster remediation for critical issues, and fewer repeat findings after fixes. When remediation becomes routine and measurable, it stops being a crisis response and becomes part of normal cloud operations. Benchmarks then serve as a consistent measuring stick, while risk thinking ensures you focus on the issues that matter most. This is how you turn a benchmark report from a moment of anxiety into a steady driver of improved security posture. When you pull these ideas together, turning benchmark findings into concrete fixes is about translation, prioritization, safe change, prevention, and proof. Translation ensures you understand the intent behind each finding, so you fix the real weakness rather than chasing checkboxes. Prioritization ensures you reduce the most important risks first, using exposure and impact as your guide. Safe change ensures fixes stick because they do not cause avoidable outages that lead to rollbacks. Prevention ensures the environment stops producing the same failures again and again. Proof ensures you can demonstrate that the changes worked and that the risk actually decreased. With that mindset, benchmark findings become a map to stronger cloud security rather than a pile of guilt, and you can approach both exam questions and real-world remediation with clarity and confidence.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.